So this is not some conspiracy theory. This is something that is in front of the Supreme Court, okay? This is the lawsuit, okay? The defendants are President Biden, Vice President Harris, former Vice President Pence, and 385 members of Congress for breaking their oath by voting against a proposition that came from members of Congress to investigate the claims that there were enemies of the Constitution who played around with 2020's results. I'll change that word a little bit, okay? Because otherwise I'll get zapped. The case is being brought up like this. How can you support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic? Answer. You investigate. If there are claims that there is a threat, even if you don't believe there is a threat, you investigate. How else can you determine if there is a threat unless you investigate? Answer. You can't. Were the claims of a threat to the Constitution? Yes. Where did these serious claims come from? 100 members of Congress. Okay. What was the threat? That there were enemies of the Constitution who successfully manipulated the 2020 election. Is this lawsuit about a manipulated election? No, not at all. It is about members of Congress who voted against the investigation, thereby thwarting the investigation. This was a clear violation of their oath. The recourse that the plaintiffs are seeking, that defendants be permanently removed from office and not allowed to hold a public office again. That's not a pipe dream. That's in the Constitution. That's U.S. law. That if you are, and you've heard of this one because they tried to get Marjorie Taylor Greene on this, committing an act of treason against the United States is grounds for immediate removal and barring of ever running again. The president, the vice president, and 385 members of Congress are at risk here. If we get into how important this is, okay, not only has this case made it to the Supreme Court, they are going to, and trying to explain this a little bit, how the court works, and I'm not a lawyer, okay? Don't play one on TV, nothing like this. The Supreme Court is going to take it to committee. The 9 justices will read the case and then vote on whether it will go to a full hearing. It takes 4 justices to take this to a full hearing. Will they get 4? We don't know. But this was announced on Wednesday that the court is going to hear this sometime in the January 2023 session, because as the plaintiffs put it, this is a matter of national security, and the Supreme Court agreed. Every hurdle they've had to cross so far, they have. There was no objection by the U.S. Solicitor General, who is now going to be defending the president, the vice president, the former vice president, and the majority of Congress. There is a real possibility, guys, that a lot of Washington could feasibly be removed and forbidden from ever holding public office again. Now, how that would work, obviously this has never happened in the United States before. Because could this completely put us in anarchy? Yeah. All right. All of a sudden, if the Supreme Court agrees that the Brunson brothers are correct in this, and they order, remember, there is nowhere to go after the Supreme Court. Whatever the Supreme Court says goes. If the Supreme Court comes down and says, I don't care if it's a 5-4 decision, that all of these people are removed from office immediately. That doesn't mean when their successor is found. Immediately means immediately. That would leave the United States temporarily without a president, without a vice president, and without the majority of both seats of both houses of Congress. I have no idea how we recover from that. I mean, talk about holding special elections. I mean, how do you do that? I mean, you've got to literally hold them immediately. It can't be, gee, we'll have a campaign and we'll fix this in 2024. No, I mean, immediate means immediate. I don't know if it would be governors appointing senators. Remember, governors don't appoint temporary representatives. Okay, senators they can, representatives no. Those have to go to special election. Who would be able to appoint a temporary president, a temporary vice president? I do not know. I'm not even pretending to guess what would happen. But with everything going on in the world right now, Ukraine, China, Iran, the economic disaster we're in, the southern border, the crime rate, et cetera, et cetera. You tell me, what's the worst case scenario? The leadership that we have out of the current administration or no leadership at all? Okay. And I can make arguments for both sides. But this is a legitimate case that is going to be heard, at least written arguments are going to be discussed by the justices. Could it get to oral arguments? Possibly. We'll know in January. We may be witnessing something on behalf of these four brothers where our entire government, or damn close to all of it, is disbanded. Some people would say that's a good thing. Some people would say, holy crap, have we just lit the fuse? Be ready for this one, guys, because the media is not talking about it. But like I said,
investigate claims of fraud in the 2020 election, putting them in direct violation of their oath in office. The lawsuit was brought about by petitioner Roland J. Brunson and is against Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Mike Pence, and 385 members of Congress. The lawsuit specifically states it is not regarding alleged election fraud, rather the members of Congress who thwarted the investigation into it. To abide by their oath as a member of Congress, the members have a responsibility to investigate credible accusations of fraud. In the oath all members of Congress have to take, they swear they will defend the Constitution against enemies both foreign and domestic.
The oath they take is to defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. They were informed there was a credible threat against the Constitution by enemies domestic. That was the nature of the claim of 100 members of Congress who warned them, right? Who warned them that there was in fact a domestic threat, and it was again people who were trying to rig the elections. By ignoring that warning, this alleges that they violated their oath.
The case doesn't allege election fraud, rather points out that by voting against a proposition from 100 members of Congress to investigate claims that enemies of the Constitution rigged the election, Congress members broke their oath in office, and therefore could be removed from their position.
That's 385 members of Congress removed from office and be deemed, rendered never able to serve in public office ever again for the rest of their lives. This would completely change the U.S. government.
If found guilty, anyone who voted to confirm the 2020 election would be barred from running for any form of public office again. and they would be removed from their position. Not only that, but it would restore former President Donald Trump to office, as he would be proven the legitimate candidate. Whether the case is heard by the Supreme Court or not, the fact that it made it all the way to the highest court speaks volumes. When the Supreme Court voted to decide whether to hear the lawsuit, the clerk called and asked to expedite paperwork regarding the case, suggesting the Supreme Court is taking interest. However, there is reason to doubt the Supreme Court will actually hear the case, considering their prior refusal to hear Donald Trump's accusations of election fraud.
Trump also brought lawsuits alleging election fraud to the Supreme Court. Members of the Supreme Court refused to hear the case. It was not the case that they said there wasn't enough evidence. It wasn't the case that it was not the case that, essentially the evidence didn't stand. They refused to look at the evidence. And that was the same people who this current case is going to right now as we speak.
The Supreme Court has not yet affirmed they will hear the Brunson v. Alma case. However, the 9 justices will vote in early January whether they will move to a hearing. Only 4 of the 9 justices, 6 of whom lean conservative, need to vote in favor for the case to be heard. Last year, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas dissented a court decision which denied an appeal that challenged a Pennsylvania court decision, allowing ballots to be received and counted up to 3 days after Election Day, saying the decision would undermine future confidence in elections. So at least one Supreme Court justice understands Americans' desire for free and fair elections. With hope, the Supreme Court will do what is right and hear the case, as it would, at the very least, hold our congressional members accountable for violating their oath to the country and to the American people. We will find out in January if the court decides to hear the case.